Beverly Hills, April 4th, 1958. The wail of a police siren fractures the heavy midnight air of the most exclusive zip code in America. Inside a palatial mansion on North Bedford Drive, a brutal mob enforcer bleeds out on a plush bedroom carpet. A simple kitchen knife with a bright pink handle rests on the floor just inches away from his lifeless hand. The woman standing frozen above the corpse is the highest-paid female superstar in the world. But the men in dark suits who step over the threshold long before the police dispatch can log the official call are not law enforcement officers. They are the legal fixers, dispatched by the studio with a single and terrifying mandate: protect the asset. I will show you how a film corporation scrubs a mafia murder scene clean before the blood even begins to dry. The global audience worshipped Lana Turner as an untouchable goddess of the cinematic golden age. She was the absolute embodiment of wealth, perfect grace, and immaculate glamour. The magazines painted her daily existence as a flawless dream composed of diamond necklaces and endless champagne. But the shimmering lights of the premiere nights completely blinded the public to the dark reality of her existence. The studio machinery created a radiant deity for public consumption, while systematically breaking the spirit of the woman trapped underneath the cosmetics. On that spring night in California, a desperate act of violence involving that pink-handled knife cracked the glittering facade wide open. The official story, released to the newspapers by the corporate handlers, effectively saved a billion-dollar empire from total ruin. Yet that exact same carefully manufactured lie sentenced a 14-year-old girl to a lifetime of psychological torment. Who actually gripped the handle of that blade when the fatal strike occurred? The answer remains buried under decades of Hollywood propaganda. How does a destitute orphan transform into a prisoner at the center of a mafia assassination? To comprehend the blood on the floor of that Beverly Hills estate, the observer must look back to the crushing poverty that first forged her desperation. The making of a tragedy never starts at the climax of the story. She entered the world not as Hollywood royalty, but as a destitute child, wandering the unforgiving streets of a forgotten town. Her father died a violent and sudden death over a handful of cash in a dark alley, severing her only source of paternal protection. This singular childhood trauma left a gaping wound in her psyche that the film industry would later exploit with clinical precision. When the talent scouts of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Corporation discovered a naive teenager sitting at a local soda fountain, they did not see a human being in need of guidance. They saw raw material ready to be processed on an industrial scale, flesh and bone ready to be minted into gold. The executives marched her into the grooming departments and immediately began stripping away every authentic aspect of her personality. They dyed her hair, modulated her voice, and forced her into garments designed specifically to weaponize her physical form. They created the sweater girl. This manufactured persona transformed a traumatized orphan into a global commodity overnight. The men sitting in the boardrooms dictated what she ate, who she dated, and where she slept. They treated her like a highly valuable racehorse running on a track of continuous exploitation. She ran until she broke. The public saw a woman who possessed the entire world, but the reality was a young girl who did not even own the rights to her own name. Every single photograph released to the press was carefully staged to project an image of absolute romantic triumph. The glossy magazines showed her smiling brightly alongside handsome leading men at extravagant dinner parties. The dark truth was that studio doctors frequently pumped her veins full of sedatives just to stop her hands from shaking before major public appearances. She existed as a hollow vessel, carrying the impossible dreams of millions of strangers. The executives viewed her tears not as a sign of human suffering, but as an inconvenient delay in their production schedule. They calculated the exact monetary value of her smile while completely ignoring the rapidly deteriorating state of her mental health. The psychological cost of maintaining this perfect illusion drained her soul on a daily basis, The corporation surrounded her with stylists, vocal coaches, and publicists. Yet she remained profoundly isolated inside a crowded room. Her desperate search for the father she lost led her directly into the arms of violent and controlling men who recognized her emotional fragility. The studio bosses watched her stumble from one abusive marriage to another, carefully observing the bruises hidden beneath the thick layers of foundation. They possessed full knowledge of the domestic terrors she faced after the studio lights powered down. They simply chose to ignore the suffering as long as the weekend ticket sales continued to break industry records. The corporate machine demanded absolute perfection on screen and offered zero protection in the real world. They constructed a blindingly bright pedestal for their golden goose and deliberately pushed her toward the edge of the abyss. The vulnerability of a fatherless girl became the primary engine driving her immense fame. It had also transformed her into the ultimate prey for the apex predators lurking just outside the studio gates. The executives owned the flawless face shining on the silver screen, but the violent men of the underworld realized they could dominate the terrified woman hiding behind it. The descent from beloved movie star to desperate hostage happened in plain sight. Anyone feeling the outrage of this stolen youth and corporate abuse must hit the subscribe button right now and stay to witness exactly how the ruthless Hollywood machine ultimately pushed this broken human being into the hands of the mafia. The descent into the criminal underworld began when Johnny Stompanato noticed the profound emptiness behind the glamorous smile of the superstar. He was not a charming leading man playing a romantic role on a brightly lit soundstage. Stompanato operated as a ruthless enforcer for the notorious gangster Mickey Cohen, and he recognized a perfect victim the moment he laid eyes on her. The studio executives watched this dangerous predator infiltrate the life of their most valuable commodity, and they did absolutely nothing to intervene. The corporate machine had already established a rigid precedent of total ownership over her physical body. Alongside the grueling 18-hour filming schedules, alongside the mandatory starvation diets enforced by corporate dietitians, alongside the daily handfuls of amphetamines required to keep her awake on set, came the physical violence inflicted by the mob. The brutal beatings occurred in dressing rooms mere yards away from the bustling production crews. The makeup artists spent hours applying heavy layers of foundation to conceal the dark purple bruises blooming across her neck and delicate shoulders. The management of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer knew exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of her private trailer. They heard the muffled screams echoing through the studio lots, and they saw the physical terror paralyzing their leading lady before every single take. Yet, the powerful executives chose total silence over basic human decency. Their ultimate mandate applied strictly to the box office returns, and never to the actual woman generating the immense wealth. They ordered the camera operators to adjust the lighting angles to hide the swelling on her cheekbones. They instructed the highly paid directors to shoot her from specific distances to mask the violent trembling in her hands. The executives drafted ironclad contracts that dictated her physical weight down to the exact pound. They controlled her public appearances, her romantic relationships, and her entire public persona. She was a piece of highly profitable property. Stompanato understood this twisted dynamic perfectly. He knew that a woman accustomed to total subjugation by a ruthless corporation would easily submit to the violent dominance of a mobster. He isolated her from her close friends and monitored her private phone calls with terrifying precision. The studio security guards simply looked the other way when he arrived at the studio gates. They feared the bloody wrath of Mickey Cohen far more than they cared about the physical safety of a terrified actress. The unholy alliance between the Hollywood elite and the criminal underworld left her completely defenseless. Every time she desperately tried to escape the abusive relationship, the studio executives forced her aggressively back into the blinding spotlight. They demanded she attend grand premieres and luxurious award ceremonies with the very man who strangled her in the darkness. She walked down the crowded red carpets draped in rare diamonds while hiding fractured ribs beneath her custom designer gowns. The corporation allowed a known criminal associate to brutally torture a human being on their own property because halting production would cost them millions of dollars in lost revenue. They viewed her physical destruction as a perfectly acceptable operating expense. The machine fed her directly to the wolves simply to keep the massive cameras rolling. When the abuser is a violent mobster and the protector is a profit-driven syndicate, what happens when the fragile tension finally snaps? The breaking point arrived on the balmy night of April 4th, 1958, inside the heavily guarded walls of her Beverly Hills sanctuary. The simmering tension inside the sprawling mansion boiled over into a chaotic frenzy of screaming and shattered glass. Stompanato cornered the terrified actress in the master bedroom, with a cold and calculating rage burning in his dark eyes. He did not just threaten to end her miserable life. He swore to take a steel razor blade and permanently mutilate the flawless face that the studio had insured for millions of dollars. He promised to hunt down her aging mother, and he explicitly threatened to murder her 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl. The psychological torment of a lifetime converged into one agonizing moment of pure survival instinct. The superstar was trapped in a gilded cage, with a predatory monster preparing to slaughter her entire family. The frantic shouting reached a fevered pitch that shook the very foundation of the luxury estate. Cheryl was not a hardened criminal. She was a frightened child who had watched a relentless parade of abusive men destroy her mother piece by piece. She stood completely frozen in the dark hallway, listening to the terrifying promises of mutilation and death. The heavy oak door of the bedroom could not muffle the horrific sounds of the violent struggle. The kitchen knife felt incredibly heavy in her trembling hands. Then, a sudden and deafening silence fell over the master bedroom. A heavy body collapsed onto the plush pink carpet. Stompanato lay dead in a rapidly growing pool of dark blood, with a pink-handled kitchen knife buried deep in his gut. The immediate aftermath of the brutal killing did not bring police sirens or medical professionals to the horrific scene of the crime. The first person to arrive at the blood-soaked bedroom was Jerry Giesler. He was a highly connected and notoriously ruthless defense attorney dispatched directly by the film studio to manage the catastrophic situation. He stepped directly over the bleeding corpse of the mafia enforcer and surveyed the horrific scene with the cold calculation of a corporate operative. The attorney did not offer comfort to the traumatized teenager or the weeping mother. He immediately issued a series of rapid commands designed to completely sanitize the official narrative. He instructed them on exactly what to say, how to cry, and when to remain completely silent. The studio bosses did not care about justice or truth, or the shattered mentality of a teenage girl standing in profound shock near the body. They only cared about shielding their billion-dollar movie star from a scandalous murder charge that would destroy their massive financial investments. Protect the asset. The fixers immediately began orchestrating the greatest legal cover-up in the history of California law enforcement, before the police detectives were even allowed inside the house. They meticulously rehearsed the statements and carefully arranged the physical evidence to construct a flawless narrative of justifiable self-defense. The truth of the bloody events was entirely irrelevant to the legal strategy of the massive studio. The corporate fixers essentially took full command of a homicide investigation to ensure the leading lady remained highly bankable for the upcoming summer blockbuster season. One heavy body fell to the floor that night, but whose hand actually drove the steel blade into the chest of the mobster? Tell me in the comments below if a powerful corporation has the absolute right to rewrite the brutal facts of a bloody murder scene just to save a movie premiere. The massive mahogany doors of the Los Angeles County Courthouse swung open to reveal the final act of a meticulously orchestrated tragedy. The flashing bulbs of 100 press cameras illuminated the marble hallway like a violent lightning storm. Jerry Giesler did not walk into that room to defend a traumatized teenager or seek genuine justice. He walked into that room to execute a brilliant theatrical production designed by a desperate film corporation. The studio executives possessed full knowledge of the bloody reality inside that Beverly Hills bedroom. They knew the fragile superstar likely drove the steel blade into the chest of her abuser during a moment of blind panic. They also knew a murder conviction would instantly vaporize their most lucrative property and cost the company millions in canceled contracts. Therefore, the powerful men in the dark suits made a cold and calculated decision. They decided the sanity of a 14-year-old girl was a perfectly acceptable currency to purchase the freedom of their leading lady. They fed Cheryl directly to the unforgiving jaws of the legal system. The terrified teenager sat trembling under the glaring lights of the crowded courtroom and recited the exact phrases the studio lawyers forced her to memorize. She confessed to the brutal killing of Johnny Stompanato. She claimed she acted entirely alone to save the life of her mother. The lie was simple. The lie was incredibly effective. The lie destroyed her young mind forever. Then, the golden girl of the silver screen took the witness stand to deliver the absolute greatest performance of her entire life. She did not need a printed script or a famous director to play the role of the shattered matriarch. She wore a modest gray suit to project an image of vulnerability and deep maternal sorrow. She wept perfectly on cue. She gasped for air between carefully timed pauses while clutching a white lace handkerchief. She looked directly at the stone-faced jury and begged them to understand the sheer terror of that bloody night. Every single teardrop falling down her flawless face was weaponized to manipulate the judge and blind the national press. Alongside the fabricated physical evidence, alongside the heavily rehearsed witness testimonies, alongside the silent compliance of the intimidated local police, the studio deployed the tears of their best actress to completely seal the deception. The official coroner inquest lasted a mere 20 minutes. The rapid verdict declared the fatal stabbing a justifiable homicide. The court completely cleared the superstar of all criminal wrongdoing and allowed her to walk out into the bright California sun as a free woman. The public aggressively applauded her immense bravery and showered her with endless letters of support. The studio executives celebrated the massive influx of free publicity that would inevitably drive record-breaking audiences to her next film premiere. The heavy cameras started rolling again. The valuable asset was fully protected. The blinding lights of the movie premieres eventually faded into the dark pages of cinematic history, but the damage remained permanent. Lana Turner returned to the luxurious mansions and the highly paid starring roles. She continued to project the flawless illusion of wealth and immaculate glamour to a worshipping global audience for decades. But the absolute destruction of her only child remained the true hidden cost of that enduring fame. Cheryl never recovered from the horrific events of that April night or the crushing weight of the corporate lie she was forced to carry. The heavy burden of the fabricated confession completely fractured her fragile adolescent psyche. The legal system sent the teenager to strict juvenile reformatories, while her mother returned to the glamorous movie sets. She spent the next several years trapped inside cold institutions and psychiatric facilities. She ran away from the abusive dormitories. She rebelled violently against the mother who sacrificed her to the insatiable movie industry. When the summer blockbusters premiered, the adoring crowds lined the streets of Hollywood Boulevard. Lana Turner smiled for the flashing cameras while wearing gowns that cost more than an average American house. At that exact same moment, her teenage daughter sat in a cramped cell at the El Retiro School for Girls. The state facility was a grim warehouse for troubled youth, where physical violence and extreme isolation were the daily reality. The public consumed the fantasy of the radiant movie star while remaining completely oblivious to the child paying the ultimate price for that illusion. The studio completely erased Cheryl from the glamorous narrative. She became an inconvenient ghost, haunting the edges of a billion-dollar empire. The executives did not care about the nightmares keeping the teenager awake in her cold dormitory. They only cared that the box office numbers continued to climb. This brutal dichotomy defines the very soul of the old Hollywood system. It is a machine designed to extract maximum profit from human suffering, while painting a masterpiece of deception over the visible scars. Today, the golden age of American cinema is widely remembered as a time of unparalleled magic and pristine elegance. Millions of people still look at the black and white photographs of the beautiful stars and long for that era of perfect romance. They completely ignore the bloody reality hiding just outside the frame of the picture. Deep inside the cold storage rooms of the Los Angeles Police Department sits the ultimate proof of their grand deception. A simple kitchen knife with a faded pink handle rests locked inside a dusty cardboard evidence box. The sharp steel blade is permanently stained with the dried blood of a violent mobster. It is not just a discarded murder weapon. It is the core symbol of a vicious industry that treats human beings as completely disposable commodities. The bright pink handle represents the innocent youth they deliberately stole to protect a movie star. The dark blood on the steel represents the violent lengths the corporation will go to protect their financial investments. The studio fixers successfully cleaned the fresh blood out of the Beverly Hills carpet, but they could never wash it off the hands of the wealthy executives. This is the true nature of the Hollywood Dream Factory. It is a ruthless meat grinder disguised as a beautiful fantasy. I invite you to subscribe to the channel right now if you possess the courage to look past the glamorous facade and uncover the next buried truth of the silver screen.